Yesterday's prophecies, today's headlines. This is the Hal Lindsey Report. And now, Hal Lindsey.
Good evening and welcome to this new edition of the Hal Lindsey Report. Tonight, we're going to continue our discussion that we started last week on God's divine institutions. It's very important that I make it clear that I'm not speaking simply from the perspective of a Christian minister tonight, though I certainly am one. More importantly, I'm addressing these issues as a concerned citizen, a citizen of a nation founded and built on the solid foundation of divine institutions created by God for the betterment of all mankind. And by institution, I mean a custom, a practice, a relationship, or a behavioral pattern of importance in the life of a community or society. If you recall, these vital institutions are human freedom, or freedom of choice, marriage of a man and a woman, the family, the sanctity of life, and the nation. I believe God designed these institutions to benefit all human societies, to produce the best chance of happiness and to ensure their survival. History demonstrates that even some of the most primitive cultures were able to function and survive because they practiced and preserved at least some of these institutions. And I'm concerned because I see the constant alarming erosion of our nation's foundation through the destruction of these essential God-given societal institutions. Now that's why I believe that we are witnessing America's rapid decline and possibly even her fall and collapse. Let's examine the vulnerability of these institutions and assess the damage each has sustained and the danger that is posed to our nation. Last week, I examined the institutions of marriage and the family. Tonight, let us begin with the right to human freedom, the freedom of choice. It is established in the first 3 chapters of Genesis. God gave to mankind freedom of choice. This includes a person's right to choose his or her own destiny. This freedom requires that we must recognize our responsibility for our choices. God shows that we cannot blame someone else for the circumstances of our environment or the results of our choices. When Adam and Eve chose to disobey the one prohibition that God gave them, that they not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they immediately demonstrated the impact that disobedience caused. As God had warned the first man and woman, they instantly died spiritually the moment they rejected God's command. However, they temporarily remained alive physically. You know, in the passage in Genesis about this, the command that God gave to Adam was this: for in the day that you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, literally Hebrew says, dying, you will surely die. And this anticipated that there would be an instant spiritual death, but there would be a protraction between that and dying physically. But the part of them that had God's kind of spiritual life did die. Without spiritual life, man cannot understand God on a personal level, nor can he have a personal relationship. The basic law of life is that like can only give birth to like. You know, our DNA is witness to that law of nature. Since the first sin, all mankind is born in the likeness of our original fallen parents, physically alive, but spiritually dead. This is why Jesus Christ declared to an outwardly moral religious leader they had to be born again spiritually in order to even understand the things of God. Worse, in the place of spiritual life, a fallen, rebellious nature has claimed its place within our souls. Adam and Eve's reaction to their first sin set the pattern for us all. Instead of happily greeting God's daily visit, guilt caused them to run and hide. Instead of taking responsibility for their disobedience, Adam blamed Eve, and Eve blamed the serpent. And ever since, we've been trying to duck the responsibility for our wrong choices and blame someone else or some circumstance for our sin. But if we recognize our wrong choices and own up to our responsibilities and the consequences, we put ourselves in a position to rectify the wrong and move forward. Whenever a society demands individual responsibility and punishes wrongdoers who deliberately violate that responsibility, we have a safer and better society. So freedom of choice is given, but with the responsibility of not using it to harm others. These concepts were written into our Constitution of these United States. America's Declaration of Independence was based on the recognition of these divine institutions. It declares, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to ensure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power by the consent of the governed." You know, the founders of the United States of America were not all Christians, but they all recognized the divine institutions established in the Bible. The right to life is based on the divine principle of the sanctity of life. The right to liberty and the pursuit of happiness reflects the divine institution of a God-given freedom of choice. And it's critical to note that this freedom is granted by God. This is why the United States of America has been a unique nation among all other nations. It's the only nation that acknowledges that liberty is not bestowed by the government, but by the Creator God. Thus, it cannot be taken away by the government as long as we respect and keep and hold on to these principles. This is the first time a nation other than Israel has sought to incorporate the social applications of biblical principles. Man has the freedom from God to choose his own destiny. Too often in our world, man has forfeited his freedom in exchange for a government's promise of perpetual security. The more services a government supplies, the more our freedom it demands in return. But this institution also recognizes the corollary truth that freedom of choice demands personal responsibility for those choices. Man is warned by God that he must take personal responsibility for his wrong choices. He cannot blame the consequences of wrong choices on someone else or the circumstances of his environment. After man's fall, his fallen nature is to avoid taking responsibility for his or her choices. Today's society is heavily influenced by the idea, spawned by the psychology industry, that most of our problems can be traced to the wrong influences exerted by our parents and environment. Thus, the consequences of wrong choices are often blamed on an unpleasant childhood, poverty, and bad environment. Our judicial system has been, in a large measure, rendered ineffective by this kind of thinking. Murderers are not really guilty because they were conditioned to do it by an unhealthy environment. I think of one particular case, the trial of the 9/11 co-conspirator, Moussaoui. One of the jurors voted to release him or acquit him because he was beaten by his father in his childhood, and thus he was justified, in this guy's opinion, in planning the murders of hundreds of innocent Americans. Abusers are simply exhibiting learned behavior according to his kind of thinking. There is no responsibility for making personal evil choices because our society no longer recognizes that all men are born with fallen natures that, unchecked, are capable of terrible atrocities. Modern psychology blames evil choices on the offender's bad childhood experiences. Celebrity criminals are said to be forced into crime by their loss of privacy and their sense of need to regain control over their lives. Well, you get the picture. There is a tendency in today's society to believe that no one is ultimately responsible for criminal behavior. You know, isn't it interesting that this whole thing started with the first man and woman choosing to eat of a forbidden tree, which is called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And, you know, I want to make it clear, the eating of whatever fruit that was, whether it was an apple or a mango. I like mango, so let's say it was a mango. Whatever it wasn't the physical eating of that fruit. It was making the choice to not believe what God said and disobey him. The moment they made that choice, they fell. And the interesting thing is, they didn't really receive a true knowledge of good and evil in the exchange of that thing as promised. And they certainly didn't become like God as Satan promised they would. And so today we have a situation where the average person can't really discern what evil is. It's because of what we're taught in various offshoots of psychology today. It's almost impossible for a normal person to think that someone could make a choice from within himself or herself to kill somebody. Because who could do that? Well, you see, that's a failure to see that the penalty of that sin caused man to die spiritually and to receive a fallen nature that is capable of great evil if not curbed. And so today, our culture is falling apart because our judicial system has a great deal of trouble trying to function. And today, we find that there's, if you try to convict someone of murder, it's very difficult to get someone to both find a person guilty, even though there may be ample evidence, find somebody guilty of murder, and then to be put to death, as the law requires. And so we find these things not being judicially handled. You know, the Bible never provided for a person to be set free or to have a life imprisonment. The Bible says if the person's convicted of something like that, they're to be put to death. I'll be back in just a moment. Hal Lindsey Media Ministries is pleased to announce yet another easy way for you to support the Hal Lindsey Report. Our new toll-free telephone number, 1-888-RAPTURE. By calling this toll-free number, you can obtain copies of the show on DVD. You can also give a tax-deductible gift or designate a monthly pledge to help keep this program on the air. Supporting the Hal Lindsey Report has never been easier. Operators are standing by 24 hours a day, ready to take your call. So call today, toll-free, 1-888-RAPTURE or 1-888-727-8873. Please call today.